How did TRL get started? How did it shape popular music and vice versa? And how was it a petri dish for things that would become reality television and social media? Go to Times Square and hold up your homemade InSync sign because today, Rad History is tackling Total Request Live. Welcome to Rad, an 80s, 90s history podcast looking back at the last time things were relatively normal and chill. I'm your host, Brian McCullough. Here's the thing people forget about Total Request Live. Before TRL, Times Square was just a backdrop. After TRL, it was a nationwide, worldwide character. Times Square had recently been transformed by the Giuliani administration in New York in the early to mid-1990s, and by the arrival of refurbished Broadway theaters and Disney stores. So by the late summer of 1998, MTV had a brand new glass-walled studio in the Viacom building at 1515 Broadway, and an existential problem. Music videos, the very thing that built MTV, weren't moving the needle like they used to. Inside the Viacom building, executives were spitballing ways to make the network feel live again. Bob Cuspit, a production executive who'd just arrived at MTV, hatched a blunt, workable idea. Take the two experiments they'd been tinkering with that summer, daily most requested video countdowns, and a loose, on-camera hangout hosted by a goofy, affable former K-Rock DJ named Carson Daly. Smash them together into one live show every afternoon at 3:30 p.m., the exact moment kids got home from school, and see what happened. There was no genius to it, Kuzbit said later. When we started TRL, it was just Carson, the camera guys, and a floor director. And we never thought about people showing up to Times Square. They did show up. In week 2 of the show, one teenager arrived outside the massive windows with a hand-drawn sign. "Hey, Carson, let me up." And by week 3, there were dozens of kids pressed against the glass. Producers took the hint and started bringing fans into the studio. That flipped a switch. The outside sidewalk became an extension of the set. A live meter of teen energy that could explode without warning, depending on who was upstairs. VJ Dave Holmes would later describe the sound of the crowd as the world's largest exotic bird shop, a single piercing note that felt almost like a mating call. TRL hit the air on September 14th, 1998, right as a new teen pop wave was cresting. MTV had already tried a sober midday program called MTV Live and some dial-in countdowns, but the new twist paired those mechanics with a made-for-TV fishbowl in the middle of Midtown. The windows were not bulletproof. The ceilings were too low for the lighting, and Times Square is, well, Times Square. But the imperfections didn't matter. The show's center of gravity was that big window. Judy McGrath later admitted the studio wasn't ideal, but they blew through the drawbacks because the view on live TV was unbeatable. Carson Daly was the other key. MTV had found him moonlighting from radio and hired him full-time in 1998. He slid into TRL as if he'd been born to stand in a noisy room full of teenagers while coaxing celebrities to play along. He wasn't a comedian or a provocateur. He was a ringmaster in the old Dick Clark mode. It made him the perfect foil for a show that invited chaos by design. Carson himself later said he left his, quote, dream job doing nights at K-Rock because TRL was an even bigger break, then quietly snuck into the station to grab his tapes before anyone noticed he had left. But the real fuel was fan participation. If you were 14 and obsessed, TRL gave you a lever you could actually pull. You could vote by phone or online for your favorite video, and producers would tabulate a top 10 in real time. under the hood, that created all sorts of weird incentives, more on that later. But on screen, it made for electricity, the feeling that you and your friends, your whole school, your whole fandom, could move something that mattered. TRL institutionalized the idea that masked fans could pick winners. It's not a huge leap from that studio to American Idol's text-in eliminations, or to the fans choose mechanics that now underpin The Voice, the NBC show Carson Daly ultimately ended up hosting. From day one, the audience at TRL made sure the show's identity tilted toward pop. Backstreet Boys and NSYNC were juggernauts in Europe already. On TRL's very first countdown, Backstreet's I'll Never Break Your Heart and NSYNC's Tearin' Up My Heart landed at number 1 and number 2, setting the tone for years. A.J. McLean remembered MTV not exactly rushing to play Backstreet early on. What changed was fan pressure on TRL. Once the fans banded together and forced MTV's hand, they didn't have a choice, he said. Boy band and Britney dominance got so extreme that producers invented a retirement rule. If a video hit number 1 for 65 days, it was taken out of contention so someone else could have a turn. Outside the glass, it could get scary. In May 1999, Backstreet's 2-hour special and their TRL appearance to launch Millennium essentially shut down Times Square. We all looked at each other in amazement, Kuzbit remembered, as police asked them to lower the blinds because kids were backing into traffic. Another time when NSYNC came through, the police estimate 7,000 fans jammed into the sidewalks shrieking from 5 blocks away, with officers wearing earplugs to cope. Inside, it wasn't just pop. The show's daily brawl for pole position often became a proxy war between teen pop and rap rock. Korn and Limp Bizkit were constant threats on the board. We always called the third spot on the countdown the Korn spot because they could never get past number 3, Kuzbit joked. Head writer Tim Healy thought of it like pro wrestling, heels versus babyfaces, with the fan bases playing their parts. And the ratings? In 1999, at the peak of the boom, TRL averaged 853,000 viewers a day, according to Nielsen. Monster numbers for an after-school block built from a window, a VJ, and a phone tree. The 65-day retirement policy became part of TRL lore. It solved a real problem. What do you do when the same 3 acts are number 1 forever? As codified TRL's particular idea of fairness, let fan bases win hard, but rotate the trophy. Academic observers even wrote about how those rules flipped the gendered script of taste-making. Teen girls weren't just consumers, they were authors of the culture in real time. Of course, if a system can be gamed, someone will game it. In August 2001, Salon reported on emails from Interscope that walked fans through how to beat MTV's anti-stuffing safeguards online. You would delete cookies, vote again, rinse and repeat, with swag and even a vote the most grand prize dangled in front of Puddle of Mud and Limp Bizkit fans. Asked about it at the time, MTV Executive Vice President Dave Cerulnik was almost philosophical, saying multiple votes weren't necessarily a problem. As long as fans were taking time to vote, it proved their passion. It still is for the fans, he said, though he added that if the prizes got too serious, the network would step in. That was TRL in a nutshell, a big idea which was to democratize what's on TV, implemented with late 90s technology and a tolerance for chaos. The audience loved the loopholes as much as the rules because both confirmed the same thing. They were in charge. That is only the first third of the story of TRL. To hear the rest of the story, search your podcast app now for Rad History, the 80s, 90s history podcast that has stories like TRL and more, and you can listen to the rest of this episode.